Hi class, in this recording we're going to be focusing on the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It's the big wrinkly thing most people think about when they think of the brain. It's highly conspicuous, highly noticeable. And as we look at our cerebrum, it's going to be involved with sensory perception, memory formation, thought, conscious thought, making judgment calls, and voluntary motor action. So it does many different things for us. We have a left and right cerebral hemisphere. These left and right cerebral hemispheres are divided by a mid-sagittal indentation referred to as the longitudinal fissure. And then to connect the left and right hemispheres of the cerebrum, we have a bunch of white matter that has tracks. And when we think of tracks, I want you to think of a bundle of axons in the central nervous system. So because these axons are myelinated, they have a white coloration, and all of these white fibrous tracks are grouped together be called the corpus callosum to connect the left and right hemispheres of the the cerebrum. And as we're looking at the cerebrum, there are shallow indentations called sulci all over it, and then there are shallow ridges called gyri all over it. What do these sulci and gyri do for us? They allow us to increase the surface area of the brain, and by increasing the surface area, we can increase processing capacity. Wrinkly brains are intelligent brains, are high power brains. The smoother your brain is, the smaller the surface area of your brain, the less information processing you can have. So really, if you want to give somebody a good compliment, you can say, wow, hey baby, you must have a really wrinkly brain. And they probably wouldn't get it. But hey, if their brain is wrinkly enough, they would actually appreciate that compliment. Wrinkly brains are smart brains. And as we look at our hemisphere, our left and right hemispheres, there's 5 lobes. And those 5 lobes of the hemispheres are going to be named for the corresponding cranial bones that we've talked about, the temporal bones, parietal bones, frontal bones, so on and so forth. So let's look at these different lobes. Oh, I am not very good at PowerPoint. I got a little click happy there. Let's go to the previous. There we go. This is where I want to camp for a bit. I'm going to camp on this slide for a bit. So there are many different functions associated with the lobes of the cerebrum. I don't want you to memorize all of these functions. I just want to give you some of the highlights. So for example, when we think of the frontal lobe, I really want you to think of abstract thought. That's a key function I like to emphasize. Your ability to have higher brain functions, to think about the future, to have foresight and planning, to have decision making, to make social judgments, and really in short, act like a grown-up. You need a well-developed frontal lobe. And this is one of the reasons why, when you're working with little kids and little kids do something stupid, like, oh, I don't know, maybe your little boy decided to cut the curtains in half and then stab all the beach balls in the house with a pencil. Not that I would know anybody who would do that in my household. But maybe your child decided to do that. And when you ask your child, why did you do that? A lot of times they say, I don't know. And really, they don't know. They don't know why they did it because they don't have a fully developed frontal lobe. In terms of when frontal lobes develop, this is one of the big sex differences between males and females. Female brains, generally speaking, will have their frontal lobes fully developed by the time they are 21 years of age. Male brains, generally speaking, won't have their frontal lobes fully developed until they are 25 years of age. And this is one of the reasons why, particularly for teenagers and individuals in their early 20s, a lot of times the young ladies think that the young men are idiots. Well, it's because those young men don't have fully developed frontal lobes yet, particularly relative to the young ladies. When we look at the insula, our insula is a buried lobe of the brain. It's very difficult to get to in our brain. We have to peel back these lower lobes without damaging them. And our insula is going to be involved with regulating or modulating our sense of taste, our sense of consciousness, and our emotional and empathetic responses. As we think of the parietal lobe associated with the parietal bone, our parietal lobe has the somatic sensation. It has the primary somatosensory cortex associated. So somatic sensation. So our sense processing sensation from the rest of the body. When we think of our visceral senses, our pain, our temperature, our pressure. These things are going to be processed within the parietal lobe. When we think of the occipital lobe, I want you to think of vision. So we have the primary visual cortex located over here in the occipital lobe, vision, occipital lobe. When we think of the temporal lobe, I want you to think of this lobe by the temporal bones that's right next to the ears. It's responsible for processing hearing, our sense of smell, and there are many other things as well. But hearing and smell are the two big ones. Within the frontal lobe, with the precentral gyrus, I forgot to mention that we help to process motor movements. Voluntary motor control is going to be processed at that precentral gyrus, whereas primary sensation is going to be processed at that postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe. So I camped on this slide for a while. There's a lot of information here. So as we look at the cerebrum, it's mostly white matter. So it's mostly going to be myelinated nerve fibers and neuroglia transmitting signals from point A to point B. And I'll say it again, tracks are bundles of axons or nerve fibers within the CNS, central nervous system. And within the central nervous system, we have three kinds of tracks: projection tracks, commisural tracks, and association tracks. So let's talk about projection tracks. Projection tracks are going to help connect the higher and lower brain functions. So they are going to be vertical tracks. So on this figure, the projection tracks, let me shift colors here. Projection tracks are going to be the green lines in this figure that extend from the deep part of the brain to the superficial part of the brain. For example, we can have the cortical spinal tracks that carry information from the spinal cord up to the cortex. We're also going to have association tracks, and those are shown in red on the figure below. So as we look at association tracks, they connect different regions within the same cerebral hemisphere. So they can go from one part of the cerebrum to another part of the cerebrum, or they can go from one lobe to another lobe. Maybe they could go from, example, the occipital to the parietal lobes. And these long fibers connect different lobes. Short fibers connect gyri within the same lobe. So projection tracks are going to connect higher and lower brain functions. Association tracks are going to connect one higher brain function to another higher brain function. We're also going to have commisural tracks, which are shown in yellow on this figure. The commisural tracks, let me shift to yellow here. There we go. Whoop. The commisural tracks are going to connect one hemisphere to the other, connect the left and right hemispheres of the cerebrum to each other. The single largest commisural tract is going to be the corpus callosum, shown right here. This corpus callosum is going to be the bridge between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. There are a few other commisural tracts, particularly at the anterior and posterior commissures, but by far the biggest one is going to be that corpus callosum for the largest commisural tract. We also are going to have a lot of integration within our cerebral cortex. When we think of integration, I want you to think of decision-making, processing information. And this processing is going to occur in gray matter. Our gray matter, or thinking or processing matter, is going to be found in a couple different places within the cerebrum. It's going to be found in the cerebral cortex. The cortex is the surface of the cerebrum. It's going to be found throughout the limbic system, which is going to be involved with regulating emotional responses. And then we also find regions of gray matter buried within the cerebrum. Those are going to be referred to as the basal nuclei. And those basal nuclei are going to help regulate some of our motor responses. So as we look at the cerebral cortex, it covers the surface of the hemispheres. It's not very thick, 1 to 2 millimeters thick, but it makes up about 40% of the brain mass because it has a lot of surface area and it has a lot of neurons associated with about 14 to 16 billion neurons. For reference, the cerebellum has about 100 billion neurons within it. So as we look at the cerebral cortex, most of the cortex, about 90% of it, is referred to as the neocortex, the new cortex. And this is called the new cortex because it's believed developmentally that this is something that has appeared rather recently within evolutionary history, as opposed to being present within all primitive animals. And this neocortex is 6 layers of tissue made up of 2 primary kinds of neurons. So here we can see the 6 layers of the neocortex, which is on the surface of the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. And the 2 primary kinds of neurons that make it up are the stellate cells and the pyramidal cells. Stellate cells are going to be spheroidal or have a circular neurosoma. So here we can see a stellate cell down here in layer number 4 of the neocortex. And they are going to take sensory input and process information on a very local level. So as you look at these stellate cells, I want to cue you in on the fact that look at how long those extensions are, the stellate cells. They have very short extensions coming off of their neurosoma. So they don't transmit information long distances. They only process information at a local level. When we look at pyramidal cells, they have, well, a giant cone for a cell body. And when you look at it on a microscope slide, here's a pyramidal cell right here. Pyramidal cells are going to have kind of triangular cell bodies as we look at them. We could have large and small. Here's a small up here. A larger one is right down here. And these pyramidal cells, let me clear the screen here, have lots of dendrites with many branches and are going to carry information long distances. So as we look at these pyramidal cells, the dendrites can go up to layer 1 and then branch all the way down into layer 4. So they're going to include information processing from different parts of the cerebrum as opposed to just processing information on a local level. The pyramidal cells are going to be the output neurons of the cerebrum, and the only neurons that leave the cortex and connect to other parts of the central nervous system are these pyramidal cells. So here we have some really big ones down here. I don't want you to focus on, hey, look at this extension going all the way up to the top, and then this other extension that goes down and off figure. So the pyramidal, particularly the large pyramidal cells, serve to integrate the cerebral cortex to other regions of the brain. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them on the class discussion board or shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.